ever notice that you're your own worst critic? How you're super quick to judge yourself in ways that you would never speak to another human? In this episode, I'm talking all about self-compassion. So stay tuned to hear what it actually means, the very latest scientific research behind it, the many ways it can impact our mental and physical health, and my own personal experiences of dealing with self-compassion so far this year. So as ever, when I was thinking about the topic for this solo episode and trying to find some inspiration, I was really sitting with everything that was going on around me, conversations that I've been having with clients, with friends, with myself. And that is usually the best way for me to find something that is useful and helpful and valuable to you guys as listeners, because we are all having a shared human experience and we often feel very similarly about things. And that is actually one of the key components of self-compassion, which is today's topic. So I realized that there were these things going on, and there are three situations in particular which seemed very different, but they all had this thread running through them. And that was, how compassionate and kind are we being when we talk to ourselves? Or more often, how aren't we being compassionate and kind? How are we being actually extremely self-critical when we talk to ourselves? So in this episode, which could be pretty long, I am going to discuss, first of all, what self-compassion is. I think it's one of those terms I know that I have shuddered at in the past because kindness, self-compassion feels very fluffy. It doesn't feel very tangible. It feels like, oh, have I just got to love myself more? And that is absolutely not what it is. Secondly, we're going to look at some of the latest scientific research behind self-compassion and the impact it has on us. Then we're going to look at the ways it affects us in our physical and mental health, and also what happens when we lean more towards the side of self-criticism on a regular basis. I'm going to cover a couple of ways to practice self-compassion really simply, not anything overwhelming. It doesn't involve taking tons of time out. It's not a 10-step process. I've just chosen two ways that are extremely easy to incorporate and should feel really doable for anyone. And lastly, I'm going to share the details of these three example situations I talked about where self-compassion's really been a big theme so far in 2025 for me, but it's shown up in really sneaky ways. So for myself, for my peers, for my clients, it wasn't the obvious issue, and it wasn't even maybe the main crux of what was going on in these situations. But everyone's ability to be compassionate to themselves has a huge impact on how they feel during it and also the outcome afterwards. So I'm excited to share some real life examples with you. So first off, self-compassion is not about putting yourself in a bubble bath and relaxing and going, I am wonderful and the world is great and I can do no wrong. To be self-compassionate, we absolutely are going to be self-aware, but we're going to treat ourselves with the same kindness and the same understanding that we would treat a friend. That is the big differentiator here. I know so many times in the past I have been hard on myself. And if a friend came to me having done what I had done or feeling what I was feeling, I would talk to them in a very different way. I have a wonderful long-term client who is everyone's biggest cheerleader. She's so excited when people have achieved things. She's sharing it on her profile. She's always cheering them on, leaving comments, sending gifts, like just so genuinely pleased for these people. And when she does the same thing, she'll go, well, it wasn't that big a deal. Well, I could have done better. Well, I should have done it sooner. And there's always this self-criticism comes up that she would never say to these people, right? She would never go on their Instagram and leave a comment and go, well, I don't think you did this very well. So it's really, really interesting. Self-compassion really boils down to treating ourselves with that same kindness and having the same understanding for ourselves that we would for a friend. Now, research has consistently highlighted the benefits of self-compassion. What I will say in reading through these studies, a lot of it is self-reported. So from a scientific point of view, you might say, oh, well, there's no actual proof there. But this is what we have, and the studies are showing a consistency in that when self-compassion is applied, it's having a positive impact. So the first one is a meta-analysis that was published last year. And this found that self-compassion related therapies produce significant improvements in self-compassion, anxiety, and depression. In 2020, a study demonstrated that self-compassion is associated with higher self-rated health across 26 samples. This one was very interesting. It was over 6,000 people that took part, and the samples were split between, I think it was 6 college student samples, 16 adult samples, and then 4 chronically ill samples, so a very broad spectrum. And that was their self-reported health, so how they reported they felt within their bodies. And that was a robust difference in the people that were studying and practicing self-compassion. Another study from last year found that individuals who practiced a self-compassionate touch for just 20 seconds a day experienced reduced stress and improved mental health. And then probably the most robust of all of these, there was a 4-year study carried out, which was published in August 2024. And that showed that students who had increased stress, but combined it with self-compassion, demonstrated higher resilience levels, suggesting that it can help one's ability to cope with challenges, which makes complete sense, right? If we are looking for an opportunity, if we're looking for a growth mindset, if we are looking to achieve things, and our inner voice is saying negative things to us about ourselves, it's going to be very, very hard to take that action, and we're going to beat ourselves up. These students that had increased stress, presumably around exam times or something like that were practicing self-compassion, had higher resilience. Well, that makes a lot of sense because they were being kind to themselves. So here are some benefits of self-compassion if we can start to incorporate it and practice it on a regular basis. Now, I will just say here, I'm not saying we have to be completely and utterly positive with ourselves every second of the day. That is not going to happen, and that is okay. So this isn't extremes. This isn't like, oh, I had a critical thought about myself once today and therefore I failed and I'm not compassionate. No, it's a practice. It's something that you ideally want to cultivate and solidify and then keep implementing within your life, because that is where you're going to see the biggest difference. So number 1 is emotional resilience. Like we said about the studies, no surprise there. Self-compassion can really help us bounce back from setbacks faster. Now, when I was training to be an air traffic controller, that was one of the biggest differentiators in whether my training was going well or not, was my resilience, literally my ability to bounce back. Because if something happened, if it got very busy and complicated and maybe was pushing me to the edge of my comfort zone of what I was used to dealing with, maybe there was an emergency, maybe something non-standard happened, how quickly could I bounce back? If I, flummoxed, or if I make a mistake and then I go, oh, I'm so stupid, I shouldn't have done that, I can't do this, and, have all of this self-talk, that's going to delay me in bouncing back and just being able to get on with things. So resilience is huge. So rather than spiraling into, like I say, this self-criticism, it's when we really make this space to learn and grow and not viewing failure as failure, but as a lesson and an opportunity to learn. Number 2 is improved mental health. So as I said in the studies above, research has shown consistently that self-compassion is linked to lower levels of anxiety, depression, and stress, and just helps us create that internal buffer. We're always going to have challenges. Things are always going to happen where we're going to question ourselves. But if we have just that little pause or that little space to be able to deal with it rather than jumping in with judgment, that has a massive impact on our mental health. Number 3, greater motivation. Makes a lot of sense, because if we are constantly being critical with ourselves, we might think that that's going to push us forwards and make us want to do better. But that's not sustainable. When we are compassionate, that actually fosters much more sustainable motivation, because we're much likely to take action without fear of getting it quote unquote wrong. And if we do, we're less likely to judge ourselves as having a personal failing for that. And I'll talk about that in the examples I give later. Number 4, physical health benefits. As that study showed, people who practice self-compassion are more likely to self-report as feeling healthy. They're also more likely to engage in healthy behaviors, such as exercise, good sleep, seeking medical care when needed, which we're also going to talk about in the examples. So it's this beautiful kind of feedback loop of being kinder to yourself and not having that critical judgment is going to enable you to make these habits. You're maybe less likely to go, oh, I started this habit and I broke it, so I've just failed and I'm useless and there's no point in me carrying on. You're more likely to go, oh, I missed my habit yesterday. How interesting. Why is that? What happened that made me miss it? And what can I do today to make sure that I carry it out? Simple. And then lastly, enhanced self-awareness. It allows you to acknowledge where you may need or want to improve or make changes without that harsh judgment. So that allows you to grow through reflection rather than denial or avoidance, which is obviously the healthiest way for us to start reaching our potential. Okay, so if we don't practice self-compassion, if we are the type of person that leans a little more into self-criticism, even if you haven't recognized it, but listening to this, you're like, that's probably me. What can happen? Well, unsurprisingly, increased stress and anxiety, because self-judgment triggers the body's stress response, just as if someone was being highly critical to you all of the time, right in your face and getting right into your head, because we're doing that to ourselves. So it can really put us in this state of fight or flight, which wears down our resilience over time. Number 2, perfectionism trap. This one is incredibly sneaky. But if we're not compassionate with ourselves in life, it can fuel perfectionism, because mistakes seem like personal failures rather than opportunities to learn or something outside of our control. So when they seem like a failure, we never feel good enough. We've never done enough. And this can lead to burnout. It can lead to a fear of trying new things when people say they're in a freeze mode because they just can't take action. A lot of the time it is this perfectionism, because they feel like, well, if it doesn't go 100% perfectly how I want, I am going to be a failure. There's very, very rarely anyone externally telling us that. If we're really honest about it, there may be people, if we have big goals or we're looking to achieve something huge, there may be people that go, you're getting above your station, or, oh, I don't think you can do that. But they are often few and far between. The majority of people that we are close to are generally rooting for us to succeed. Like I said about my client, she wants to see everyone succeed. She wishes no ill to anyone, and she's thrilled when people do amazing things. So it's quite often our own perfectionism and our own fear of quote unquote failing that keeps us stuck there. Number 3, emotional exhaustion. When you are being your own harshest critic, it really drains your energy. And that energy drain obviously then puts us in a position that it can be really difficult to feel positive because we're low energy. So we're stuck in that cycle. And number 4, strained relationships. If we are constantly being hard on ourselves, it can really spill over into how we view and treat other people, because we're creating unrealistic expectations for ourselves that can mean that we have those for other people. It can look like a lack of empathy. That is a very sneaky way for it to show up, but it's very interesting if you think about how do you talk to yourself. That obviously will have an impact on how you view and judge other people. You might not talk to them in the same way. You probably would never say to many people out loud the things that you might say to yourself in your own head. But just notice, are you holding them to the same impossible standards that you are holding yourself? So all of that to say, self-compassion isn't just about feeling good and I'm amazing and I'm just going to let myself do whatever I want because I deserve it. It's a crucial part of your mental fitness. It can really help you to navigate challenges rather than feeling like you're constantly fighting against the current and feeling like you are in this perpetual state of not good enough, criticism, and judging yourself. So, how can you cultivate more self-compassion in your life? There are many, many ways that you can do this, and I don't want to make this podcast overwhelming. And like I say, I don't want to give you a list of 10 things to go away and do, because inevitably then you'll be like, oh, I didn't do them, and now I feel bad. I am a bad person, or, I don't care enough, or I didn't prioritize this, and what does that mean about me? And we do not want that. That's the opposite of what we want. So I have cut this down to two extremely simple practices that don't require a pen and paper, don't require you to be anywhere special, don't require you to do anything special other than take 10 seconds to be aware. The first one is the self-check-in. You would literally pause at a random time, maybe set a timer on your phone, or maybe it's at a certain time of the day that you can incorporate it, like, hey, I'm going to brush my teeth, so I'm just going to do this self-check-in. Just pause and close your eyes and just ask yourself, how do I feel right now? And you might go, I feel really tired. Or you might say, yeah, I feel pretty good. Or you might say, I feel a bit shit, to be honest. All of those are okay. This is not about judgment. It's about naming how you feel. This helps to increase your self-awareness and validates your experience. And the thing that's so beautiful about this simple practice is you are getting a jump on noticing how you feel at much more neutral times, rather than waiting for feelings to come up and then judging yourself for having them there. So if you're going, how am I feeling right now? All right, I feel good, but not great. Okay, that's it. That's it. Then you can move on. Maybe you say, how do I feel? And you go, I feel really angry. Now that I've noticed it, great. I feel angry. I can name that. That's okay. That's part of the human existence. Everyone feels angry at some times. And then when anger comes up at a more unexpected moment, you've increased your capability of dealing with it, because you will notice it as like, oh, I'm angry, without judgment. And number 2, talk to yourself like a friend. I'm sure this doesn't surprise you given everything I've discussed so far, but when you catch yourself being self-critical, if you notice that voice in your head being rather judgmental or nitpicky or just plain mean, which also happens, imagine it is a close friend in that situation. What would you say to them? Picture them in front of you and think, what would I say if they were feeling like I feel about this particular situation right now? And then say it to yourself. You don't have to speak it out loud. You can say it internally. Like I say, these practices can both be done anywhere, any time of day, really quickly. But often that helps us create this buffer between all these automatic thoughts in our head and noticing them and going, would I say that to this person? No. What would I say instead? Crafting something you would say to them and then saying it back to yourself. That is an excellent way to train your brain to reframe things. There is often a misconception in personal development, coaching, that one day you won't have negative thoughts. One day you won't speak critically to yourself. That somehow there's this goal to eradicate those things ever happening. I remember having a client say to me once, oh, I can't wait until I'm like you and I don't think like this anymore. And I was like, no, doesn't happen, because we are human. What we aim to do with our own growth and development is to put things in place that don't let these types of things like, critical thoughts prevent us from taking action. But we put something in place. We have a tool or a technique like self-check-in, like talking to yourself as if you were your best friend. We put those in place because they give us a little bit of space between us and our thoughts and our feelings for us to be able to process it and decide what we want to do with that information rather than blindly believe in it. We will never stop having thoughts at times that don't feel great. We will never stop talking to ourselves in ways that don't feel great. But when we have mechanisms like this in place, an awareness so that we catch it and go, oh, I was being mean to myself there. Not available for that. Let's reframe it. How would I rather talk to myself about this? That is how we will grow. And then the thoughts will become more automatically positive. But that's not to say that negative things will be eradicated. This is a big, big kind of thing in the personal development space. And often people feel like they're failing or they're not doing enough because they'll still have a negative thought. No, it's not about that. It is about understanding the amount of power you have in being able to distance yourself from your thoughts and redirect them. And exercises like these two are deceptively simple, but most people will not do them. And they're the thing that makes the biggest difference. You're not going to jump from how you feel to, the 99% positive mindset instantly. We get there through actions, and things like the self-check-in and talking to yourself like a friend are two great actions for cultivating that. Okay, so as promised, I'm going to share with you three sneaky, insidious ways that this self-compassion piece has come up so far this year in my life, with clients, with peers, with conversations I've been having with people, that on the surface, you might not think is anything to do with being compassionate or critical. But this thread was tied through all of them. And as soon as I recognized it, I realized I needed to pop it into the podcast and share it with the world. So, number one, I have been feeling rather tired and unmotivated, probably since about November. Now, not that unusual. It is winter here in the UK. It is grey. It is wet. It is cold. It is dark. It is windy. It is all of the things. And it's very normal, obviously, for our energy levels to feel lower in those kind of seasons. But as Christmas came and went, and then I got back into work in January, I was still feeling just unmotivated. That's the best word that I can use for it. And I was discussing it with a friend, and I found myself saying, oh, maybe I'm just not very good at running a business. Maybe I shouldn't be doing it. I'm just not excited. It feels hard. I just feel tired. I shouldn't feel like this. Why do I feel like other people are doing it? Why can't I do it? And this whole repertoire came out. And then I caught myself. I was like, no, I've been running a business for 6 years now. Of course I can do it. I'm feeling unmotivated. What is it? And again, I could have jumped to, oh, everything's wrong. I need to burn my business down. I shouldn't be offering this program. I need to change everything up. I think so often our brain does go, oh, I've done the wrong thing. I built the wrong business. That's why I feel like this. So I really had to sit with this and where this demotivation was coming from. And then through a series of other events, I ended up at the doctor, who gave me a blood test. And when the results came back, I had low iron and insufficient vitamin D. And if you look up the symptoms of low iron and insufficient vitamin D, it's everything I was feeling. It's brain fog, it's fatigue, it's lack of motivation, it's It's just extreme tiredness. And in that instant, I went, I've almost, judged myself here to the point of thinking I'm bad at what I do, when in fact I have anemia. Like, there is a big difference between those two things. So the first lesson that I want to share here is, don't jump to conclusions about yourself. If something isn't quite right, explore why it's not quite right. And it could absolutely be that you're in the wrong job or career or relationship. It could absolutely be that there's something about your situation that's making you feel really miserable and unmotivated. But if you're pretty self-aware, and if you've been, doing the work and you've built a life that you desired the way I have, if you're feeling that unmotivated, maybe it's something else. There's often other things at play. It's not always us that are failing. So always think about stuff that's happening, with the moon phases and in the cosmos. A lot of people are very affected astrologically. A lot of people get very affected by air pressure, sudden changes in air pressure. I know I do. I get terrible headaches when the pressure climbs or drops quite quickly. I sometimes get nosebleeds. There's all these other external circumstances. And yes, actually, if you have an underlying health problem that is impacting your body's ability to use oxygen, of course, you're going to feel depleted, tired, fatigued, and unmotivated. So all of that to say, I have a marvelous supplementation protocol now, and I am already starting to feel better just a week or so in. But I wanted to share that one because don't always default to thinking that you are not good enough if you're not performing at the level that you feel like you should be. There could be something else at play. Okay, number 2. As a coach, I'm very mindful to never word anything that my clients have done as wrong or a mistake. Now, I don't think that way anyway, but I remember in coach training, how it's so important that you are not judging what someone has done or is doing, but you're giving them a space for reflection, and you're maybe asking them questions that make them question whether it's the right thing to be doing. So we often make ourselves and our actions wrong. We often have this kind of dichotomous thinking of this is right and this is wrong, and there's no in between. So for an example with a client, maybe they've made a decision or they've implemented a plan and it didn't work out as they wanted. They didn't get the result that they wanted from it. As a coach, my job is to be objective and to frame those actions as either something that is getting them what they want or something that isn't getting them what they want. Do you see how that's very different to you did this wrong, or this was the wrong thing, or you made a mistake? So it's simply removing the emotion from it and saying, is this action, if they're still doing it, or if it's something they did that action get you more of what you want? Did it get you closer to what you want? That is a very, very powerful way to look at things, because deciding whether to continue with that action or not is then coming from a very empowered and neutral place. So an example could be someone has hired a team member for their business and it did not work out. Let's just say, this isn't the real life example, by the way, but let's just say it went spectacularly wrong. They may feel, quote unquote, stupid for choosing the wrong person. They may feel, quote unquote, mean for having to let someone go. They may think they should have known better and been able to do better, even if they'd never hired anyone before. Can you see how that is the opposite of self-compassion? Can you see how that person would be making it about them and their own personal failings, when in fact it was a decision that they probably took with the information that they had, with the best resources, and it didn't work out? I know I've been there in my business and it's not great, but calling themselves stupid or making themselves a bad person for having to fire someone, or focusing on the fact that they should have done better, even though they did the best they could given what they had and what they knew. Can you see how that is extremely self-critical? But this is very, very common. What we would want is them to have this neutral lens of whether the person being employed is serving them. Is it serving their business? Is it doing whatever they were intended to do? And that removes any blame and judgment, but it leaves room for reflection and for lessons to be learned. So that person can say, okay, I hired that person. It didn't have the effect that I wanted it to because they were meant to do X, Y, Z, and actually none of those things got done. So it wasn't good. What did I learn? I learned that I hired this person because I liked this about them and they said this in their interview, but actually there was a skill that was missing. And in hindsight, with the information I have now, I can see that that skill is critical to them being able to carry out that role. Lesson learned. Okay. Very different to, I should have known better. I feel really stupid. I can't hire people. I don't know what I'm doing. I shouldn't be running a business. Okay. And then number 3, this one has come up many times this year in many different guises. And whatever position you're in, whether you are a leader, whether you're part of a team, whether you are part of a family and a relationship, whether you are an entrepreneur, whether you're an employee, it doesn't matter. At various points, you will be both giving and receiving feedback. Feedback is a part of life. And I'm just going to share 3 reflections here because giving and receiving feedback could be a whole episode of its own. But I'm going to just share some reflections here from the lens of self-compassion and not being critical to ourselves. Number 1 is that feedback doesn't equal criticism. It may feel like it. It's not always nice to receive, but it does not equal criticism. It is an opportunity to improve. We can often feel if someone is giving us feedback that we just focus on the negative. And again, if we lean more self-critical, we're going to hear what they said and go, I've done a terrible job. I'm awful at this. I shouldn't be doing it. I'm not as good as so-and-so. Like, we can spiral into this whole story. If we can have compassion for ourselves, we'll view it much more as, okay, so I didn't do that as well as it could be done. What can I learn? How can I do it better in the future? Am I, from a very neutral place, am I the right person to be doing this? Not, I shouldn't be doing this, I'm useless. But am I actually the right person or should someone else? So it enables us to ask these questions and see what we're going to do with the feedback without it being a very, very personal, intense feeling of criticism. Feedback does not equal criticism. That is one of the biggest lessons that I learned training to be an air traffic controller, where for 3 years, pretty much you're getting constant feedback and it's usually not good. If you're doing something good, that means you've mastered it and there's no need to mention it. So the majority of feedback that I got for 3 years was critical feedback. And that is to say, this, you could do this better, or don't do that, or how else could you have done that? So I think that obviously had a massive impact on my ability to take criticism less personally. Back in December last year, I went to a live event for a community that I'm part of, which is all about public speaking. It's a big event. There were about 200 people there, some of the top keynote speakers in the US, and people had the opportunity to go up on stage for 2, 3, 5 minutes, different periods of time, and perform a part of their speech. And then they would get feedback from these people, from industry leaders, from people that have made tens of millions through speaking, through agents and bureaus who book speakers for events on a daily basis. They stood up in front of them and in front of an audience of 200 other speakers or wannabe speakers and put themselves in that position to be vulnerable, to do part of their speech and get feedback on it because they want to be better. So when we reframe that and make sure that we don't see it as a criticism or a personal attack, but we see it as an opportunity, that is how we can be self-compassionate when it comes to thinking about feedback. Number 2, if you are on the receiving end of feedback, as I kind of alluded to there, take it in slowly and digest it. Don't rush to make it mean something about you. It's very easy to project our thoughts about ourselves onto what someone else says, even if they didn't actually say or mean what you're thinking about yourself. So just make sure you give yourself some time and space to process it, and make sure that you either get it written down or you write it down so that you can come back afterwards and look at it more objectively, without the emotion, without the shock, without any kind of feelings, but to be able to come back and say, what can I actually take and learn and implement from this? And then lastly, this situation that a client had last month that I coached them through. Giving feedback can feel really hard when we're concerned about upsetting the other person. So if you are in a position of leadership, if you are a business owner employing people, if you are a leader of a team and you have people reporting to you, and you are a decent human being with empathy and feelings, as everyone listening to this podcast is, we can worry about upsetting people. We can worry that we are going to hurt someone by what we say, and that is not nice. However, going back to number 1, feedback does not equal criticism. So ensuring that it is delivered in a way where it is feedback and it is not criticism, which I'm sure, like I say, no one listening to this would purposefully do anyway, is often what the person needs to hear. We need honest feedback to be able to grow and do our best. Is that to say they won't be upset? Maybe not. But you are not upsetting them. They are upset with the information, likely because of their own self-critical voice, right? Leaning into everything we've talked about today. But you can't not give someone feedback so that you don't feel bad or awkward. That is unfair. Giving the feedback is serving them. When those people stood up on that stage in December, no one just went, that was great. Yeah, that was really, really, really good. Yeah, brilliant. Next. Because that's not what they were there for. And they want to be the best at what they do, like we all do. Why would they just want to hear great things about themselves? So some people had to hear some uncomfortable truths, and they accepted it really well, wrote it down and took it away so that they could improve. Never don't give feedback that could actually be incredibly valuable to someone and could help them to improve because you feel awkward. And that's where you really have to remove yourself from this. You're not criticizing, you're giving feedback, and you're giving someone an opportunity to learn and do better. When it is delivered objectively, you're doing them a huge favor. The more open and honest feedback conversations we can have, the better it is for all of us. So, as I said, that was quite a long episode, but I felt like I had quite a lot to share on the topic. And I know for many introverts, self-compassion is something that does not come naturally. We turn inwards. That's what we do. We go into our inner world to process things. And so our inner voice can quite often be the one that we hear the most and can feel like the strongest one. But just remember that there are things that we can put in place, starting with those 2 simple exercises that I talked about. So you can have your self-check-in and you can notice how you talk to yourself and decide, what would I say to a friend? Even those simple actions would have a massive impact. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I would love you to really reflect on which of these situations that I talked about resonated with you. Where did you think, oh yeah, I feel like that when that happens? And also just notice, without judgment, where are you on the scale? Are you more self-critical, or are you more self-compassionate, or are you a good mix of both? Where would you like to be? If you notice that you're leaning more self-critically, would you like to be more self-compassionate? And even taking those small steps without judgment is going to be a huge, huge stride towards being kinder to yourself. Thank you once again for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Ambitious Introvert. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode. I hope that you're feeling expanded to what's possible for you, motivated to take action, and inspired about how you can start to own your energy. I share even more tools and resources on my Introverts Only email newsletter. By signing up, you not only get early access to the Ambitious Introvert products and services, but you also get brand new podcast episodes delivered straight to your inbox every Monday, meaning you'll never miss your weekly dose of introvert-friendly inspiration. Sign up now at theambitiousintrovert.com/newsletter or click the link in the show notes. See you next week.